Appreciate everybody being here tonight. I think tonight you will hopefully find some satisfaction in the fact that we're going to spend really the whole evening really just collaborating with each other, talking about what we're thinking is important at this point. We're going to have a chance to actually start talking about priorities. We're going to have a chance to start doing a little bit of brainstorming around some solutions as we go through tonight. And so hopefully that will be a good thing for some of you guys. So the things that we're gonna be looking at tonight is really, like I said, just around that collaboration stuff. We have two different activities that we're gonna go through. One is looking at where we left off last week, really, and that's kind of taking a look at trying to prioritize some of this programming stuff that we've talked about over the last several weeks, and then go through a love it or list it exercise, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get closer to that. The format for this is going to be such that we're going to go into small groups, and so your small group will have either 4 or 5 people into it, kind of like the tables that we did at the first meeting when we were together in person. And we'll go into the small group for about 10 or 15 minutes, probably closer to about 15 minutes, and give you guys a chance to really just talk and collaborate. It'll look just like the large group format or the room that we're in now, but it'll be just 4 of you. And so what I'd like, though, is for when you get in there, is to elect or assign, however you feel like doing it, but get somebody in your group to be able to take some notes, all right? And then that person can either take some notes on like a Microsoft Word document or a Google Sheet or something like that. And what I'm going to ask is that you send that to me afterwards. And so if you're doing a Word document, that's great. You can email it to me at the email address that you get all your emails from me on. Or if that's not real convenient and you're more a paper pencil person and you want to just handwrite notes, that's fine. Just grab your cell phone and you can text me a picture of your handwritten notes after the meeting, and I'll get you the phone number as well at the end of the meeting, just so that you've got that in case you need it. And for reference, it's in my signature block, again, on all the emails that you get from me. And so when you first get in the group, elect somebody to do that. We'll do small groups for about 15 minutes. We'll come back out, and then we'll have a bit of a large group discussion around what we talked about in small group. And so we'll kind of go around the different groups. We'll have an opportunity to kind of report out, give a chance to provide just a little bit of comment and discussion from a large group standpoint. And then we'll go to that next topic, the love it or list it, and we'll do the same thing over again. Spend some time in small group, and then come back out and have some discussion in the large group. And that's really going to be the extent of our meeting tonight. It will, I'm certain, take up all of our time. We may even run 10 minutes late, but I promise you we're not going to run real late, and we'll try to be real cognizant of that time as we're trying to do after that real long meeting. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time at the beginning of the meeting talking about anything, but I just want to draw our attention back out, since we're going to be doing a lot of group work, to our meeting norms here. We're not going through all of these, but what I really just want to do is highlight the fact that everyone's voice is important. And so when you're getting, especially in your small groups, if you've got somebody who's just not talking, reach out, make sure that person doesn't have something to say, maybe invite them into the conversation. But we really want to try to get everybody's voice in this process. And that's one of the reasons why we've got, a smaller number of people in each room or at each virtual table. So just try to keep that in mind and try to make sure everybody has a chance. All right. So as we take a look at where we've been the last couple of weeks in understanding some of the strategic planning stuff that the school district has done, and then also the videos that you hopefully had an opportunity to watch at least some of with Ken Robinson and Bill Daggett, we've heard a lot about programming. And and things that happen in our school. And so, just to recall from the district standpoint, we talked about the high reliability schools, and some of the components that were in there were, the idea of safe and supportive schools. We talked a bunch about the use of technology, and Eric came and gave a nice part of that presentation that night, explaining the technology uses that we have in the district. And then last week we talked about mental health and special education, and we learned about a lot of support services that the district offers, most of them state required, state mandated, but those were services a lot of times that came into being and came on because of laws that were passed after many of our buildings were designed and built. And so we have some buildings that were not necessarily designed to be able to deliver those services. The other thing we talked about was just the idea of school climate and culture as a part of that whole idea of social emotional learning. And so those are components that have an importance to what we do in school. Ken Robinson talked about in his videos this idea of creativity and passion in how kids learn, and how in his opinion we open up and we teach things like math and science through the arts, and embed a lot of our curricular programming in a wide variety of ways. And then he also talked about this idea of an environment for organic student growth. And just what some of those environments look like in our schools. And then Bill Daggett spent an hour and a half pretty much talking about the needs that our kids are going to have to be successful in the 21st century world. And he talked about putting this stake out there 5-10 years from now and saying, what are we doing in our schools to get our kids where they need to be in a world that exists 15 years out. And so we talked a lot about what those needs were potentially going to be for students. And so we have all these different programming things that again are deemed important, but we can't necessarily really easily do all of this at the same time. And so the real question here, and what we want to talk a little bit about, is how do we prioritize the programming needed or desired in our schools, so that we're able to inform how our facilities support those concepts, right? And so what I thought I'd try to provide a couple of examples there from other task forces that we've worked with in the past, and just some of the things that they've talked about. And we get around this idea, for instance, in high reliability schools, and what a lot of task forces have talked about, probably pretty understandably, is that a real priority is school safety, okay? And so when we're in this group and we're talking about these things, we might want to jot down school safety as being one of those high priority items, right? Now, we don't need to talk about secure entrances or those types of things, because those are more solution driven. We're going to have an opportunity to do that tonight, but in this exercise here, we're just talking about those programming concepts. So school safety. When we talk about the needs of kids, we talk about perhaps a statement similar to we find a priority in meeting the needs of every student where they are, right? And that maybe incorporates some of the mental health and special ed things, but it also incorporates AP of curriculum that we're trying to deliver to students, and a wide variety of things like that. And so those are the types of concepts that we're talking about. We might say modern technology and STEM programming, STEM programming is really important to us. And so hopefully you get the idea there. I don't know if Brian Grinnell, if you've got anything you want to add to that as far as some examples that we've talked to other groups about in the past, but I'm happy for you to provide some insight that way.
I think you provided some examples, but what I like to tell people, and that is let's pretend you're the superintendent of schools in the United States, and you have a blank sheet of paper, and you get the opportunity to put down on that piece of paper what your priorities would be in schools. So you're not thinking about, you're thinking about all the things that we've talked about, but you now have the opportunity to design your school with the most important priorities listed. That makes sense?
Okay, so just to give you guys the most amount of time to work with each other, we're going to leave it at that. We talk about these things, and like I said, the next step in this process, the second half of our meeting, we're going to talk about more specific things. But again, it's what are these programming things that we've been talking about that are kind of most important. We know that they're all important, but how do we prioritize that list? So, all right, Brian Peters, are we good to go to? Okay, perfect. So why don't you go ahead, Brian Peters? We're going to go to the rooms. I think will they be sent directly, Brian, or will they need to click over themselves?
Everybody got a message popped up on the screen, should have, that says you're invited to join a room. You'll click on, when you click on that, you're going to leave this main session, and at any time you come back, I will visit them or pop a message to give you feedback to come on back.
Okay, awesome. So if you have trouble, we'll help you out, but we'll head to the breakout rooms then at this point, and we'll come back in, we'll say about 15 minutes, and then we'll have some large group conversation around what this is. All right. Generally speaking, was that, were you successful in having a conversation as a group?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So oh wow, yeah, we got people with thumbs up, so that's great. Awesome. Everybody's going to be a Zoom expert by the time we're done with this darn pandemic thing. I want to be fair to those other folks. I don't want to start reporting out I mean, I want to start for time reasons, but I don't want to start without everybody here able to hear. So,
Do you want us on the mode where we're still able to see your screen?
pardon me?
Do you want us to still be in the mode where?
Yeah, actually, I no, that's a good point, and I did that last night when we did this same thing. I will stop sharing my screen so everybody can see each other.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't mind either. I just wanted to make sure I was on the right setting.
Yep. No.
Tom, there was a note in the chat room that talked about, do you want us to email our meeting notes now or after the meeting? And I think
after the meeting's fine. Yep, after the meeting's fine, and I'll put a slide up that just shows my contact information for everybody at the end. Brian, are we good now?
Just waiting 30 more seconds. I'm forcing the rooms closed, so John's iPad will come back in. We couldn't figure out how to get the feature on the iPad, so 25 seconds, he'll be forced back in here.
All right, so what we're going to do, everybody, is we'll go around, we'll go through the groups. The person who was the note taker, I think what we'll do this time, just so it's efficient and they've got the notes in front of them, we'll just spend about kind of 1 minute, just report out kind of what you thought your higher priority items were. We don't need to hear the whole list necessarily, but if you could give us a couple of your top items, and then why, maybe just a brief explanation as to why you picked those a few items as your top choice as far as priorities. Looks like everybody's back now, so why don't we start with what was the group number that came back just recently, Brian?
I think 5 was the last one to come in.
5. Okay. All right. So let's start with group 1. I don't know who was in group 1. Hopefully you know who was in group 1. If we need, Brian can tell us who was in group 1. Well, let's start with group 1, and whoever was the reporter for group 1, let us know.
Ellen, Clark, Emily, or John's iPad.
And don't forget to unmute yourself when you talk to us.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So we did a lot of discussing on trades and technology and trade, 4-year school versus trade school, We touched on using spaces, for example, vacated spaces like a Sears building or something like that. And if we would be able to refurbish that to some extent, then we weighed some pros and cons on how old the building would be and if we'd be able to use it for the different types of education or kinds of education that the students need specific to that space, and tried to balance cost versus benefit. So we did like a pros and cons type of thing. Some of the buildings are, 50 years old plus, and so it would cost a lot more money to repair versus starting from scratch. So we talked about that. Talked a lot about lighting, natural lighting. Sorry.
Got a helper tonight.
Yeah, he likes to try to take part. He's been doing Zoom for school, so
That's all right.
he probably knows more than I do, though. Let's see what else we got here. We talked a little bit about the, like, for example, Red River, the skylights. Honey, no, thank you. The skylights and getting rid of things that are past their prime, or fixing things that are sort of over their age limit. Anyone can chime in if I'm missing what we discussed for the majority of the time.
Okay, sounds good. Why don't we move to group 2? What did you guys identify kind of from a programming standpoint as being important things to make sure that we're able to accommodate and affect in the schools?
I think I'm in group 2. I hope I was. I didn't write it down for sure, but
We're happy to have you anyway.
We talked about schools needing to be equitable across the district in every aspect, starting with elementary, and clear up some disparities from air conditioning to being handicapped accessible, and those types of things. And we talked about having flexibility and privacy for students to meet with teachers and counselors with adaptable spaces, and how we need to pivot and move in a new direction because that's the world we live in.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. How about group 3?
I believe group 3 was my group. So our biggest priority was the safety and security of all students, especially from a building standpoint. And then we talked about mental health. I don't think we need to elaborate on that. We all know that's pretty important. And then we also talked about cost, being mindful of community support for building costs, figuring out how we can get community support and voter support to raise funds for building costs, and thinking about the most effective location for maintenance costs, and cost-effective buildings in general. So.
Okay, great. Awesome. Group 4.
That was our group. So we started out talking about just the different perspectives. So I had asked the question, it would be helpful to know what the school district and teachers and students need from their perspective, so that we know what needs aren't being met with current facilities. And then Craig had pointed out that, to kind of look at it without looking at those needs and just looking at it, coming at it from a different perspective was also valuable. So we talked a little bit about those two different perspectives and balancing them. We also said that safety is a priority, mental health as well, and having spaces that support the specific needs of some of those mental health programs. Teacher safety, we kind of tied into there as well, in relation to facilities, Jenny had talked about the fact that sometimes entire classrooms need to move because there's a student that's having problems, or it's not safe for other students to be around that student, those kinds of things. So tying those together. And then we had just a couple of questions that we were wondering about. One was the concept of a school within a school and what exactly that meant. The term has been thrown around a little bit, what that meant and what that would look like from a facilities perspective. We also talked about our current situation of going to distance learning and how that may affect things going forward. We talked about things like hybridized setups for learning, maybe at the high school level, that some things were online, some things were physical, and wondered about how spaces might support that. And then we also talked about the need, kind of going back to the videos, the need of spaces and furniture and physical things that support curriculum to be flexible and be able to change with those needs. So I think I got all of that. If my group members want to add anything, jump in.
Yeah, so that's an awesome list, and the idea of perspective to look at that, Whitney, that you had mentioned right at the beginning, I think is an important thing. We've got one student that is on the committee in a formal sense, and we'll work on trying to draw out some additional student voice into this. When you talk about the school within the school, and I've seen that show up on the survey as well, and a couple of those other things that you talked about, we are going to hit on those things in this next stage as we talk about the facilities themselves, and what you have, and then what modern learning environments could look like. And so so I think that you'll be pleased, whoever in your group had that comment, or more of you, that we will actually, we'll dive into some of that stuff in this next process. Okay. So all right, so what am I on? Group 5, I think, is next.
Yeah, I took the notes for group 5. Very similar feedback as to what everyone else has been saying. We talked a lot about flexibility and being equitable. Also mentioned, safety and mental health. I think that we were interested in, knowing, is there enough money to educate kids and keep up facilities in the ways that are needed? Especially in relation to, how COVID-19 is going to affect those types of things. Also had the question about, will students be doing more online learning now after COVID-19? What does that look like? We also kind of discussed education as skills education rather than knowledge education. And so facilities that promote skills building and the ability for flexible space for more hands-on, potentially like project-based learning for students, or at least the capabilities to do that. And then another thing that we discussed was, technology infrastructure. The technology infrastructure needed in schools 10 years ago looks very different today, and it's going to look very different in another 5 to 10 years. So if anyone in my group has anything to add that I missed, feel free to jump in.
So those are some great things. Let me ask the group real quickly, and you can respond with a thumbs up or a yes check mark or something like that. I'll put a note in the survey this week as well on it. But I'm wondering, is there an interest? It's kind of interesting timing that we're having this discussion in the middle of the COVID-19 issue, right? And we all know the world's going to look different after we come out of that. How much it looks different and what exactly how we look different, we don't know yet, obviously. But would you like to spend some time in one of our meetings just having the school district talk a little bit more about what some of the plans are that they're looking at or they're hearing about? I know that no school district really has definitive plans yet, but a little bit further down the road here, would you like us to spend some time on that whole COVID issue, what school is anticipated to look like this fall in particular? Okay. I'm getting enough of a signal that would be of some interest. So we will work on plugging that into our process as well. So I appreciate that, folks. All right, group 6.
I'm wondering if that's our group.
It could be.
It is now. How about that?
It is now. You're right. So go ahead, Tricia.
All right. So we had a lot of really good discussion. One of the things we talked about was just that whole idea of mental health support starting at a younger age and maybe building some of that foundation, helping students with early intervention kinds of things, and that might go a long way. We talked about basic safety as being really the foundation of what we need first, and then the programs would follow. So kind of that hierarchy of needs sort of thing. In terms of basic safety, we also talked about class sizes and not being overcrowded, and that makes a huge difference too. We talked about technology being important, but we really felt like the size of the rooms and the amount of students in a room is also very important. We talked about a main concern would also be a healthy building where there's natural light, sunlight, and just the systems to make things work behind the scenes are things that people don't notice. And so just making sure it's a healthy building with good operating systems and that natural light and all of that. Something important that came out of our discussion too was just the thought of, are there appropriate spaces to have these mental health conversations? And we talked about having a variety of spaces within a school so there isn't a stigma of a student going down a particular hallway, identifying that student as either having special needs or having a mental health kind of concern. So I really liked that idea of spreading it different places throughout the school. So kind of a multi-space use. We also talked about Sears, as other people mentioned, wondering if something like that would be feasible, or utilizing Eielson somehow, just with the thought of whatever we do that might be a new facility isn't going to be up and running right away. So we really talked about what do we do in the interim, knowing that we're going to need something. It's not going to happen overnight. So just thinking about what could we do creatively for a short-term basis. And then just thinking about could we reconfigure some of our current spaces differently and maybe have smaller rooms within a big room. And then really just that early intervention piece, again, we already talked about that, but just feeling like that's really important. And I guess only one other thing we talked about was recruiting and retaining quality staff and how the facilities can also help us with that. So that's something that the district is also focusing on, but we think it all sort of can tie together. Anything else from group 6 that might not be group 6, but now is?
I can't find your name exactly on the list, Tricia, so I don't know if you're group 6 or group 9 or which group you were exactly, but we'll figure it out here.
Okay, sounds good.
You guys covered a lot, but it was great. All right, so while we figure out what group you were in, no intention on bypassing 6 if you were not 6, but let's go to 7.
Okay. We talked a lot about the things that have already been mentioned. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So we did have the safety and security in our buildings. Oh, we had the mental health on there. We also had the technology. The one that I don't know if we've really heard yet was the creative learning. So keeping up with inventive ways with that creative learning process and everything. So in Team 7, is there anything that anybody would like to elaborate on? All right.
No?
I think that's what we got, Tom. Thanks.
So, sounds like a good list. Group 8, which I believe was Josh, Kevin, and Sonia.
Yep. So ours sounds a lot like 5 with a little bit of 6 and a little bit of 7 maybe, and going backwards too. We just talked a tiny bit about the accessibility to mental health services, special education, but programming for all students, because as it's been said, this world we live in is ever changing, and how students come to school or what they bring with them to school is different every day. So to be prepared for that. So that ties in with what a lot of people talked about. We did talk about creative education, teaching students to problem solve and use critical thinking skills that might be missing in some schools today. So especially tying that into technology, we asked a lot of questions. So how much are students being challenged in schools using technology? We talked about our students, and maybe this is just because of COVID especially, but our students just being taught, this is how you click, this is where you turn it in, this is how you make this. So not that we use the word robots, we didn't, but our students being trained to follow instructions, or are they being trained to problem solve and think creatively and in adaptable ways, flexible ways? So instead of giving them all the steps or teaching them the steps to solve a problem, giving them the problem and saying, this is the end result, solve it any way you can. Kind of that forward thinking or future thinking or experimental thinking. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. We talked a little bit about buildings or classroom spaces. They should be warm and inviting. They shouldn't be cold and clinical or overheated in August and May. Technology options and accessibility for all buildings and all students. Placement of interactive whiteboards as an example for instruction, so the flexibility there. Furniture, and then things like building structures. So the flexibility for current or upcoming wireless needs. So don't just plan for what we need today for technology. We need to be forward thinking for all sorts of things in our buildings.
Great. Awesome conversation you guys had. All right. So room 9. So there's some thinking, Trisha, you might have been room 9. But room 9 was Gaia and Josh and Lori and Michael. Were you guys in also with Trisha? Okay. All right. So let's go back to 6 then, because I think we missed you guys. David, Jill, Lee, and whoever signed in as T.
Hey, are
Anybody
you there?
from that group?
Yeah.
Hey, Lee.
Hey, I'll start it off and then the others can jump in. We actually talked about a lot of these same things. We talked about mental health, we talked about social workers, and we talked about grants that are going to be running out. We talked about counselors and paras and how we're going to get funding for some of these things. But one thing that we really talked about in our group was we feel that we need to sharpen the edge a little bit on what this task force is doing, at least in our group anyway, and I was pretty vocal about it. I feel like we need to adapt a little bit more quicker to what's going on here. The pulse out in the city is, budget cuts at the city, budget cuts here and there, layoffs here and there, unemployment here and there. Nobody's really in the mood to talk about referendums. Nobody's in the mood to talk about future referendums. It's going to be a really tough sell. And I think we need, and maybe we're on that road now, Tom, but we really need to kind of focus our direction here a little bit. I feel like we're talking about 10 different things at one time, whereas maybe if we had more of a structured list of things that we need to address, boom, 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 and we as a whole group could talk about it and address it and then move on to the next, would be really helpful. We love the slides, the presentations. We know the people, well, we don't love them, but we know the people that put a lot of work into them. We love their dedication, but we need to get on with things here. And maybe that's what we're starting to do, but we got a lot of work to do. And this whole COVID thing doesn't help. And it's like, when we get to the end of this, we need to be able to say, look, here are our recommendations, boom, 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 boom. And they got to make sense at the time, right? And we're just starting to get the feeling, at least I am anyway, that we're just kind of all over the place and we need to have more focus in these Zoom meetings. But the biggest concern other than that is when grant funding runs out for social workers and for different, counselors and that, there really isn't a backup plan as of right now to fulfill that need. And we don't feel that the general public necessarily understands what's going on in the schools. So when we go to them in the, this facilities task force, we're looking at all these facilities, we're looking at, what we need, what we don't need, what we can best utilize these buildings for and all this stuff. At the end of the day, we can have all these meetings, but if we don't have a solid presentation for the school board to make a decision, this is all going to be for naught, because people, in order to sign off on any kind of referendum a year from now or a year and a half from now or even whatever, we got to have some really sharp points as to, hey, this is what we're doing, right? And I just feel like at least our group, they can speak up. I'll give them the air back. But I'd like to hear what everyone else's thoughts are on it, maybe.
Yeah. So we'll be talking a little bit more next week about what some of those budget perspectives are and what some of the specific things are around the facilities in particular, because obviously we're looking at facilities that are problematic. And then from there, we dive into specific things around the buildings that are problematic and need to be addressed, right? And the need for some type of a plan, like you're talking about, and some kind of prioritization on how we look to spend whatever money we have, you know, whether we've got a whole bunch from a referendum or we only have the budget that we have today because there is no referendum. There still needs to be a plan on how to address the things that need to be addressed. And so a number of those specific things are coming in the next couple of meetings where we're gonna see that perspective. Now, ideally, the stuff that we're talking about here the last 3 weeks would have come in one meeting, you know. Unfortunately, it's just spread out because of the format that we're in here now. And then hopefully we've got a pretty good plan set up for doing tours. We just hope that we're able to actually come together to do those tours. If not, we're going to have to do something more virtual. I'm hoping we don't have to do that. We've been through this process a number of times, and I know there's some frustration at this point in the process, but we're trying to build this foundation so that everybody has kind of an understanding of what happens in schools and what some of those priorities are about what we do in school. Because when we start talking now about buildings and the facilities and those components that are more specific, there's some decent context to use to try to prioritize then what really is important and where we spend those dollars that we have. Because we will never have, no matter whether we have a referendum or not, we'll never have enough money to address everything that we feel like we need to address all at once, you know. So there needs to be this plan. I promise you, we have at the end of this process, we will have a good presentation to the school board with some specifics that are in there that really identify what those priorities are. You know, once we get through this process, and I understand the frustration that some of you guys have at this point on that. Just trust me a little bit longer. We will be, I think, to where you want to be as far as talking about these things. Really over the course of the next couple of weeks, you'll see us moving in that direction. I think it'll make a little bit more sense to you. And if not, I'm happy to have conversation offline as well. You know, more conversation about kind of what that broader process looks like. So I think that was all the groups. Now, you know, we're up against our 1 hour at this point. Now, the next thing that we were going to do really was to come back here and talk a little bit more about some specifics. And so, just sharing my screen. I don't know how many of you guys watch Love It or List It, but it's a fairly popular program on HGTV. And it has some strong parallel. It's an enjoyable show, but it's got some strong parallels to what we're trying to process through here. And when you watch that show, whether they're looking to love it or they're looking to list it, what they're looking at there is really redesigning or redefining the space that they have in their home from a functionality standpoint. They're looking for improved functionality. They have this need to prioritize the needs around what they're doing, right? They're up against a certain number of budget limitations. They can't do everything ever. And undoubtedly, at least on the show, they run into some kind of infrastructure issue, like, you know, we've got a cracked foundation, and that takes away from the other things that we're trying to do from a functionality standpoint. And so really what we want to do, and I'm going to ask you guys if you want to do it tonight or if you want to push it forward, but what I really want to do is go to getting an idea then with the things that we've talked about so far. What are those non-negotiable items that are on our list? You know, thinking about even the type of list that they use in Love It or List It. And so here we're talking about, you know, we need secure entrances. We need collaborative spaces, perhaps. Some of the things that we talked a little bit about, or you guys mentioned already, the idea of natural light, the furniture updates. I think also even one-on-one devices from a technology standpoint. Now, it's not a specific infrastructure thing, but it ties into what we're trying to do in school, and it impacts both our budget and perhaps how we lay out and we design our spaces. If we're really doubling down on technology, then we need desks, for instance, that can contain a Chromebook or a computer of some sort, a textbook, a notebook. And in many of our classroom spaces, we just don't have a physical workspace for kids that's big enough to contain that kind of thing. And so what I wanted to do is to spend about 10 minutes back in your small group talking about what are kind of those non-negotiable specific things like secure entrances that that we can do. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to throw it out to you and say, do you want to spend about another 15 or so minutes in the meeting, small group, and then possibly do just a real quick round the table with the large group, or do you want to push this forward? And I'm fine either way personally, but I do want to respect your guys' time. So let me throw it out. You guys are using some of the thumbs up and the yeses. Let me throw it out. Do you want to continue? Thumbs up, or thumbs down if you don't want to continue tonight.
Say yes to continue and no, or you want to do thumbs up?
Yeah, you can use yes or no, or thumbs up, thumbs down.
Say answer yes if you want to proceed, no if call it a night.
And Brian, you're going to have to tell me what you're seeing because I'm not seeing.
Oh, that's right. You don't see the total. So we're about 4. Well, you can see it if you click on the participant list. I see 5 yes.
I do see that.
8 no's, 9 no's.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to do this to respect time. We're gonna push this forward. We'll incorporate it into our next meeting. Our next meeting also we're going to have some information for both Scott Berge and Chris Arnold. Relative to the facilities and the concerns that we've got, the struggles that we have that we're going to need to start prioritizing about the facilities themselves specifically. So we can build this into that presentation. I will check in with those guys and see how long their presentations are. I've asked them to be about 10 minutes each, so that we do have enough time to collaborate in next week's meeting. I will let you know via email. Just a real quick poll question again. I don't know if you can clear the message things on there, Brian,
Yep.
so we can start over. But
Yep, they're all clear.
Could we go an extra 15 minutes next week to make sure, or potential 15 minutes extra next week, if you know that ahead of time, to accomplish what we're doing? Yes, if you think you're okay with that. No, if you're not.
I see a lot of yeses. 14 yes, 15 yes, 0 no. And Tom, there was also a good question about a new schedule with the shortened meeting times. If you want to send that out as well in the chat.
So just to clarify that question, is that just kind of looking like an agenda for what we're covering over the next 6 weeks or so?
That's Jenny.
Okay.
I'm
absolutely
assuming that's what it is, Tom.
Sorry.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
I can definitely do that.
Okay. Sorry. We had initially, it was like every other Thursday from like 6 to 8:30 or whatever.
Correct.
So
if
we're only going to do an hour, is it going to be every week?
That's what our plan has been.
Okay. Sorry if I missed that. I
and-
apologize. I did miss one meeting. So maybe I was.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's what our plan has been, and that I kind of pushed out a survey really early on when we were looking to go virtual, and most
Right.
folks seem to think that an hour every week was a good compromise in order to keep some forward momentum, understanding that we didn't want to just kill the process, and so we've been trying to adapt, to that new format. And it's not perfect, and we don't get as much accomplished virtually as we would in person, and with the shortened time, we also lose some some ability to cover the topics. But
Yeah.
but I'll send out what we're looking at over the next 6 weeks here, and I would suspect that in order to maybe make up a little bit of time and to appease some of the concerns that you guys have as far as being able to go deeper with each other and on some of these specifics, we'll probably extend most of our meetings out probably to at least like an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, just so we have an adequate amount of time to get everybody's voice heard. Again, it flows much nicer in person, but unfortunately, we just can't do that right now. So, thoughts from anybody else or comments? Okay, so we'll look to do the love it or list it next week, so you can kind of think about some of the specifics, and then we're going to start diving into the specifics. And just to give you a quick brief schedule thing, we've got Chris and Scott lined up next week to talk a little bit about some of the budget impacts of the facilities and what we're doing. And Chris is going to give us an overview of what they're looking at in buildings and grounds, and really a broader perspective of what all some of these issues are that we need to try to deal with, and the challenges to trying to have a solid plan, and the reason that we need the input from us around trying to make decisions on those things, especially as it relates to budget. And then we'll get into the following meeting some specifics on the buildings themselves, and then we will go into the engineering assessments on each of the buildings, and just going off of memory now, and shortly thereafter we're lined up to do tours. So hopefully, with any luck in June, we might be able to start getting on some tours. So we'll see. But we might have to juggle a couple of those agenda pieces if it looks like we're pushing later June before we can be in person. So, but I'll send you out a full schedule. I don't want to go entirely off of memory and then be wrong. All right. Anybody else have comments or questions?
There's a number of questions in the chat. Based on time, okay. I might suggest record those questions and follow up with emails. Good questions about. I see one about Chris Arnold and Scott Berg will be available for questions next week.
They definitely would be available for questions. Yes.
There's some question too about the possibility of extending the time. I think that may be something we can include in the survey for next week, that, with small group interaction, it just takes longer to get some things done. And maybe people are willing to spend more time if it's more small group instead of just sit and get type thing. We can include that in the survey.
Okay. Is there anything else on the chat that we can try to answer, guys? All right. Then we will be done for this evening. That's really the end. Oh, you guys wanted my contact information, and I'm not sure that actually I did put this in the slide. I did not put it in the slide. So either reply to the email that I've sent, any number of the emails. It's tom.weber, W-E-B-E-R, @sitelogic.com. And I'll put it in chat right now to everybody. And if you want to jot down a phone number, I can give it to you as I'm typing it. But it's 608-235-0963. And so there's my email address in chat. There's my phone number in chat, and it's also in the signature block on, should be every single one of the emails that you've gotten from me.
If people want to save the chats too, it looks like there's a button on the right lower hand side where you can click on it and it says save chat. I don't know if anyone's interested in that.
I will send an email after our meeting here tonight with the same information in it for you.
Cool.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time and I appreciate your patience. And as I said, I promise you this, the process is effective. We've done it many times. Even though we're virtual and we've got a few challenges here, I think you will be pleasantly surprised as we continue through the process. And I'm happy to talk with any of you guys one-on-one offline as well. So feel free to give me a call or pop me an email and we'll set up a time, and happy to talk to any of you as well. Okay. All right, great. Have a great rest of the night, and we'll be in touch via email as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Tom and Brian, stay on, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Be safe out there.